Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another presentation at Warriors Corner. The topic is Data Centricity at Speed and Scale, with presenters Lieutenant General Xavier Brunson, CG First Corps, Dr. Raj Iyer, HQDA CIO, Major General Jeff Ray, Director, Army Network CFT, Mr. Nick Sachs, Deputy PEO C3T, and Mr. Joe Welch, Director, DEVCOM C5 ISR Center.
Winning the future fight is about data, getting the right data to the right people at the right time and place to act decisively. But as soldiers and commanders encounter more and more data from a wide range of information sources and in a variety of different formats, the Army must provide the technology to help them discover, translate, and route the most relevant data where it needs to go. The Army's Tactical Data Fabric is a critical tool in this effort, bringing together multiple sources of data to enable sensor-to-shooter connectivity and better decision-making on the battlefield. Project Convergence 22 provides an opportunity to experiment with improved Tactical Data Fabric capabilities from Project Convergence 21 as part of the Army's campaign of learning to enable joint all-domain command and control.
My name is Xavier Brunson. As Dr. Iyer said, I command America's First Corps. The scale of the problem that we're talking about here, a problem that's been solved, a lot of work's been done by industry to get us from the art of the possible to what's actually available right now. Dr. Iyer talked about the cloud. There are SIPR and NIPR services in the cloud. This is something that our Army's been able to do that started out simply with me having a conversation with Dr. Iyer and Mr. Paul Puckett, who I think is still out there. Yeah, hey, Paul. And it was about, I believe that in order to be, as the operational commander in the Pacific, in order to be effective, in order to make sure we were making best use of our soldiers and the missions that we had ahead of us, that I would have to operate in a distributed fashion. And you say, well, we've always done that. Well, we actually haven't, because it's taking note that there are certain capacities and certain capabilities that we've got to get forward. It's a recognition that everyone doesn't have to go. There have been 20 years of everybody going, and I think that there's something to be said for a home station node, which I'll call enterprise-like, ought to be able to communicate with the edge, and the edge ought to be able to communicate back to the enterprise. And I talk with Dr. Iyer, as simple as I am, about the fact that I just put an EOS router in my house. And I unplugged one of them, but I was still able to stream Rick and Morty from my basement. And why can't we do that in the Army? And a simple question, talking with Paul Puckett, sort of sketching out what I thought we'd have to do in order to be agile, resilient, survivable, and scalable in terms of conducting operations forward against our pacing threat or challenge, our pacing challenge. We'd have to be distributed, because that's the only way we can get to where we need to be. There are limits on strategic lift. There are limits on the time and distance that we're going to have to deal with if a crisis or a conflict occurs within the region. For example, how many people here know that there are 17,000 islands in the nation of Indonesia? Because I didn't. So I'll raise my hand and then everybody else can raise their hand too. Because I didn't know that. Okay, Indonesia would stretch from the east coast of the United States to about 200 miles into the Pacific Ocean off the west coast. That's the scale that we're dealing with. That's also the scale that our partners can't deal with, because they can't have us sit on top of them with 656 members of my core staff. Like, hey, we're here to help. Nobody needs that kind of big government, right? But what they can do is they can take a node that's able to communicate back, that's able to have access to decision quality data. And you won't find a definition of that. But what it really is the data that I need to make the decisions necessary to have the Corps continue to move forward. Heretofore, that's been hard to access. But there are opportunities that exist here now by the work of a great many of these gentlemen that are here right now that make it possible. I believe my job as an operational commander, as the warfighter, is to develop a requirement. My job is to say, this is how I believe I have to fight in the future in order to be successful. And to their credit, to all their credit, we've been able to do that. It started with a simple problem statement, and you can read that. I won't bore you by reading it myself. That's the problem statement. That's what we had to solve. I don't think there's another slide behind there, is there? But that was the problem we had to solve. And with the great partners here from our Army, our CIO G6 and others, as well as NET CFT, we've been able to do this. And I think we're a lot further than what we thought we'd ever be. And that, for me as a commander, that's as good as I can get. Now, the secret sauce to all this is being able to link these efforts over time. And that's what we're doing. We're trying to link all these efforts in the operational realm, as well as the more technical realm. We're trying to link these things together that we may have a product that will carry the Army for years to come. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, sir. Next slide, please. Hey, I'm General Ray. I'm the Network Cross-Functional Team Director, and my job is to take everything that you just heard from Dr. Ira and General Brunson and figure out how to put it all together as the what. And how we do that is to move away from like Dr. Ira said, from a network-centric to a data-centric environment. And we're no longer going to look at things from a boxology perspective. We're going to use software as a tool to get after some of the problem sets that we have out there. So how we're going to do it? We're going to do it in those 4 pillars that I have laid out there on your left, my right, which is transport agnostic systems that we're going to change our model on where we do business today. Right now, we secure at the transport layer. We need to reduce complexity at the transport layer and secure at the data layer. So what we're doing is trying to find better ways to have auto pace, and you'll hear a little bit from the Art of the Possible here in a little while, Mr. Welch, talk to you about some things that we're doing from bandwidth virtualization and auto pace that we're actually putting into project convergence, and then we're going to pull out of project convergence and put into the hands of soldiers so we can test it. From a data-centric perspective, from that environment that we're looking at, that cloud-based environment that Dr. R spoke about, we have our tactical data fabric that's going to be also in PC 21 that we're going to leave in the Indo-PACOM region for the soldiers then to, again, give us feedback on that capability. We must move to a cloud-enabled and move away from that network-centric. We can't take the network on our backs anymore. We have to leave it in the cloud, and we have to reach to it through our transport. But in order to get all that done, we have to have a robust security architecture. If we're going to integrate the integrated tactical network into the integrated enterprise network and make that unified network, we have to have a better robust security transport. And that's going to come from a zero trust architecture. Now I want to break down, because I want to make sure everyone understands from a zero trust what I'm talking about. From a zero trust, when we talk zero trust, is the user to the device to the network or the application. From the data perspective, how we create data in the future, using attribute-based access control to get to the data, we're going to tag it differently, we're going to label it differently in order to get to it using attribute-based access control to get after it. But while we're doing all this, we're going to bake in cybersecurity across the board. So from an ATEC perspective, the Army Test and Evaluation Command, we're working a model where we can bake in and test early to ensure that our systems are secure across the board. So last year I talked about these 4 pillars. This year I'm telling you that we're putting them into project convergence, and we're actually doing it and then leaving it in the hands of soldiers so they can test and evaluate and give us feedback on it. So we've come a long way in less than 12 months, and we're putting it into the hands of soldiers past project convergence. Now you're going to hear from Mr. Sachs, the PEO, the Deputy PEO, on how we're going to do this across our capability sets. So I appreciate it. Thanks, everybody, for your time.
Thank you, General Ray. My name is Nick Sachs. I'm the Deputy PEO for C3T, and we have the unique challenge of trying to figure out how to take that what that's been described and actually acquire it to be able to field to the forces to give them the capability they need. And I think what I'd like to talk about is kind of 3 major buckets of the how and what we've done. So the first would be about 4 or 5 years ago, we made a pivot away from the big bang approach of developing large systems where we would take a requirement and go lock ourselves away somewhere and develop that capability for 4 or 5 years and then come back and deliver it when maybe that capability has been overcome by events. So what we've done is pivoted to our capability set framework, and we've built a lot of momentum and unity of effort around that framework, where we're taking 2-year capability sets and developing and delivering capability in 2 years. And we're doing that in a way intentionally to keep the building blocks open so that they can be responsive as technology and innovation happen. We can insert that technology, and also as the threat evolves, we can insert technology to counter the threat. The second part I'd like to talk about is user feedback. So throughout the whole process, we've been collecting feedback from our users constantly. Every time we give them some kit, we want them to tell us what works, what doesn't work. First Corps has been a great partner. Colonel Liz Casely's out there. She's been great to work with, and they offer us a lot of positive feedback. And by positive, I mean helpful, not that everything's rosy. We want to know what works and what doesn't work. But we take that user feedback and we're able to adapt what we're delivering based on that feedback to make sure it's useful. And that part gets a little tricky sometimes because everyone may have a different opinion depending on where they sit because the mission sets are so different. So we try to take all that disparate feedback and get it into actionable information that we can use to enhance what we're delivering to the soldiers. And I would say the third part that's key for us is that we're never really done. So we've been doing capability set 21 for the last 2 years. Within capability set 21, we fielded to 8 brigades. We modernized 6 ESBs, converted them to ESBEs. We fielded 2 MDTFs, and in all, I think in FY22, we touched over 300 units with some form of modernized network capability, whether that's transport or mission command applications, fires applications. But it doesn't stop there because innovation keeps happening and the threat keeps evolving. So, for example, we're partnering right now with First Corps on their training exercises in the Pacific. We're very appreciative of the partnership. We're working with them on providing different transport options, both from a hardware perspective, software perspective, business case, how we buy SATCOM terminals or radios, and to see how we can help them with their tyranny of distance to be able to communicate across all those tens or hundreds of thousands of islands. At the same time, we're working on them to help build a enduring information enterprise or infrastructure that's kind of underpinned and enabled by the tactical data fabric to allow them to have some sort of tailorable operating picture. So General Brunson and his units can have the information they need when they need it, and they don't need all the information everywhere, but they need certain information in certain places to be able to make key decisions. And we want to provide them with that infrastructure that allows them to do that. So it's going to smaller, more agile, more responsive programs and acquisition pathways, using that soldier feedback and understanding that soldier feedback is never done and our iteration and our improvements never done. And that's allowed us so far to be able to get after providing increased capability. And I'll turn the stage over to Mr. Joe Welch.
Thanks, Nick. So you've heard from the what and the how. Right now, I'm here to bring you the art of the possible. So art of the possible, another way of talking about that is sort of what's next. And I think it's helpful when we consider that to think about, where we've already been, right? So the theme here is data centricity, but the first thing that General Ray told you about was the pillar of transport agnostic, right? And the only way that we can get to data centricity is to have a network that we know that we can rely on, that can enable this seamless data flow on the battlefield, and it's not something that we take advantage of, right? So when you look at the art of the possible several years ago that came out of the S&T community, one of those areas was the C5ISR Modular Open Suite of Standards, or CMOS. So this was the modular open systems architecture that is now being employed within our acquisition partners to be able to very quickly implement not just network solutions, but data, sensing, and many others for all of our mounted platforms and increasingly other types of platforms within the Army, so that we can maintain our speed of modernization activity in an architecture like that. So that was an art of the possible. Now it's a today thing, right? Also, transport agnostic. General Ray talked about some names of projects, and really what I want to leave you with is that it's great to have all of these communications options. If you walk the floor around here, you'll see lots of great companies that have lots of innovative ways to ensure that our soldiers can maintain communications, and they can do them in an effective way that ensures that their data can get where it needs to go, that they're protected from jamming, and that they're protected from things like geolocation, okay? And these all may have certain circumstances where they work better than others. And so on the one hand, it's great to be able to present options into our formations to be able to enable seamless communications, but with all of those options comes a lot of complexity, right? And so from our S&T community, what we've begun transitioning into within our acquisition partners and in partnership with the network cross-functional teams are the decision aids and technologies that enable the network in the tactical environment to be able to take advantage of all of these capabilities simply and seamlessly without burdening our soldiers with a bunch of configuration and decision making on how to enable that. So don't forget that data centricity does rely on a robust and resilient transport network architecture. From the data-centric environment perspective, you heard Nick and General Ray talk about the tactical data fabric. You know, what we've proven in the past several project convergence exercises is the power that a tactical data fabric element can bring to the sensor-to-shooter fight, especially when we look across joint assets. The ability to bring that data into a common environment, have that operated on in a common way to be able to develop solutions very quickly is a success and is part of what has transitioned into the acquisition frameworks. And so when I think about what's to come, right, there's a lot of advantages that we can take of a data-centric environment in terms of the ways that we can ensure that our soldiers and our commanders can take all of this data in and be able to rapidly make very good decisions based on an enormous amount of data, much more than we've ever had on the battlefield. And so there's still a lot of potential in the art of the possible when it comes to data centricity. Just a couple of points I would make on that in terms of how you can kind of support where we're going in the future. The first is I would just say in this area of C5 ISR, gone are the days when that was exclusively the domain of where we're putting our basic research investments. I mean, just look at the enablement of commercial technology to be able to support, you know, our forces, and there's an enormous amount of leverage that we can bring on that. We can invest our S&T dollars wisely by taking advantage of that, and that's part of the role that we play within the Army, is partnering with industry to be able to explore what truly is in the art of the possible. And the last thing I would say is just on the experimentation front. Nick hit on this, you know, when it comes to the acquisition programs of record. We do an enormous amount of experimentation as well. We have access to many units. We're working with General Brunson's First Corps. We're working with USER PAC, the multi-domain task force. We're bringing in not just our solutions, but the solutions that are out there commercially to help inform how they can be tied together, where the Army's capability documents might need to point in a direction of achievable technology so that our warfighters can have these capabilities as quickly as possible. And working with us, I mean, that's kind of where we all start here, is in the art of the possible, and be able to inform the Army and get that ultimately transition to acquisitions that can benefit our soldiers and warfighters. So with that, I think we are wrapped up on the panel presentations portion of the Warriors Corner today, and we're happy to take any of your questions. There are a couple of microphones I know that are being passed around, so if you would just raise your hand. I'm not sure who wants to go first, but somebody's got to do it, and we'll have a mic over to you, and you can ask a question of the panel in general or any one of us specifically.
Someone has to go first. Frederick Salveson from Disruptive Technologies. You guys mentioned two focal areas as distribution of data, and the second one is cybersecurity. And I wanted to ask whether you guys are doing any work on a data level cybersecurity plan as opposed to perimeter or, you know, protecting the unit itself. Are you guys looking at protecting to the data level itself? And what is your focus there, and what's your timeline?
Yeah, I'd be glad to start with that. So, I mean, I think you are describing essentially what is the data set. We don't talk about the opposite of a data-centric environment, but what it is a network-centric environment, which I think is what you're describing, right? Where the data itself is protected by the network that we've employed end-to-end, right? And so there's a lack of differentiation within the data, right? What you heard, the example you heard General Ray give is the example of being able to make these separations, these decisions at the data level. And there are a lot of technologies that have been employed in other environments, right? Certainly in the commercial environment, but also within the DoD, for example, in our intel environments, that there's a lot that we can bring to bear into tactical. Some of the challenges, I would say, are tactical zero trust, for example. So zero trust principles can provide an enormous benefit. Our ability to maintain that when, despite our best efforts, maybe there might not be continuous network connectivity is an area of research that at least I can speak to that we're still doing and working with our industry partners on. So I guess that's my view on the question. I'll turn it over to anyone.
Yeah, if I can just add to that. So I think what you just said is the exact definition of what zero trust is. Because zero trust is all about saying we're going to protect the data. And yes, it doesn't mean that we're going to leave the networks unprotected, but the focus is on the data. And I'll tell you, I mean, this is how we've been doing this for years and years, right? We think our networks are secure. We build a whole bunch of firewalls and routers, and we feel like somehow, the more firewalls we have and the more separated it can be from the rest of the world, somehow it's more secure, right? That's the whole perimeter defense approach to protecting data. But the problem with that is we know fundamentally that our networks are not secure. Our peer adversaries of the future, and even today, we're contested in cyber domain every single day, can relatively easily penetrate our networks, even our best defenses on our networks. So the focus now has to be on protecting the data, and that means looking at it from a risk perspective. Who are you asking for this data? How sure are we that you are who you say you are, right? What device are you coming in to access the data? Is it an approved device or is it an unapproved device? Do we have it in our database somewhere? Are we tracking that configuration? Is it patched? Third, what network are you coming in on? Are you coming in on an Army-approved or DoD network? Or are you coming in through some other network, that we call dirty network, right? So all of these are taken into consideration, and then we dynamically can calculate a risk score that says, okay, your risk is X, which means that based on this level of threshold, all we'll allow you to do is just access the data, but you can't edit it, as an example, right? So you can get to this kind of like granular level of detail in terms of access into the system and what you can do with the data, and that's what zero trust is all about. But this is going to be a big change. This is a big culture change for the Army of how we've always thought about cybersecurity as protecting the network. Now we have to shift to saying, okay, now the data's got to be tagged. We got to put the right business rules and policies on who can access what data under what conditions, and that will then drive, the rest of the access by different types of users.
Just, one part that you mentioned that you said you weren't asking about is like perimeter security, right? But I think that there's value in that. So what the Corps has found out is points of presence are important. Every place, every city in the world has a certain level of noise that exists there. And if you get above the noise, then you are imminently targetable, okay? So that data is resident in the place where you're targetable at, and then boom, data's gone. But it's also one of the things that Colonel Casely and I have talked about is how do we do data triage? The things that I need to make a decision are not the things that you need. See, anybody that's been in the Army for at least a day knows you can remember if you were E4 or above in a TOC, you had a SIPR phone, you had a NIPR phone, you had a NIPR computer, you had a SIPR computer. All those points of presence are at risk. So what we've started doing is saying, well, surface data triage is just getting the right ports at the right place with the right people who can access the network that can take best advantage of zero trust. And then it's going on and saying, what data do we need and where do we need it? Because that also limits risk. If you don't have a tremendous amount of points of presence, if you don't have a whole bunch of folks on the network, if you don't have people that are going to say, they said don't put thumb drives in here, but I don't think they were talking to me. Everybody knows those horror stories. So what we've got to do is the onus is on the consumer. I consider myself a warfighter and a consumer of the great work that these gentlemen are doing and leading. But as a consumer, the onus is on us to make sure that we tell our folks that so that we can have this access that helps us to operate with the art of the possible in a way that I could not have thought about operating like this as a 113 platoon leader in bomb holder Germany in 1991. Would have never thought this because it was TA-312s, it was running out wire, and did it get cut? I don't know, just run out some more. We'll be able to talk soon. But I think that we, the soldiers, have to understand, the consumers, the warfighters have to understand that in order for this to work, we've got to start thinking differently about our networks. This is not a signal problem anymore. If we're going to be in a combined, joint, multinational environment, then we've got to take a little bit of this on ourselves and not just push it to the sixes of the world. Data doesn't have a branch yet. I don't have any inside knowledge, but.
Sir. Hey, gentlemen, John Klein, Johnson Controls. And I really applaud the data-centric environment that all y'all talked about and the alignment towards data-centric and data-based decisions. I wanted to ask you a question about the installations. They're part of the strategic support area. Is there a plan to make facility-related control systems and SCADA part of the data-centric environment, get that information into the cloud, and incorporate standard zero trust architecture for the operational technology, because it represents a real vulnerability to our Army? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. So earlier this year, we actually established the Army's first operational technology cybersecurity strategy focused on exactly that specific problem. Because we knew as much as we were mature and somewhat robust, in my opinion, in terms of how we protect traditional IT, when it comes to operational technology that supports all our power projection platforms, whether this is at our depots, arsenals, and ammunition plants, or ports, you name it, we have some operation technologies, all the control systems that drive equipment, some of these equipment, one in the world, right? And so it's an easy attack vector for our adversaries, knowing that those are not so well protected. So we put together a strategy in place. We actually set up a control systems governance office in the Army G9 with a specific mission and focus on protecting operation technology at installations. And I'm happy to report that actually just 2 weeks ago, the Army actually received funding from the White House's Technology Modernization Fund to actually fund a program to establish a security operations center for all of the operational technology at Army Material Command's 23 industrial base sites. So this will be the first time in the Army where we're actually going to sensor every one of our industrial base sites, collect the data in the cloud, perform analytics, look for bad behavior, anomalous behavior, be able to in real time actually segment the networks, the operational technology from the rest of the networks, and be able to do that at a scale that we were not used to before. So again, based on the strategy that we established, we put together a plan, and now we're well on our way to actually implementing that plan this year.
I think this question is primarily for Mr. Welsh. Todd Carrico from Cougar Software. So the Army has some huge data problems, and I think the work that you guys are doing is fantastic, and it's a critical first step. Can you talk a little bit about the vision of moving beyond just data to where we're getting, especially as we're looking at a future where artificial intelligence is part of our planning and decision-making process, how we transform from data to information to knowledge and actually be able to bring in the context of the larger operational battle space in our decision-making?
Okay, got it now. Yeah, that's a great question, right? I guess if you look at the pillars that we were just talking about earlier, right? A robust and resilient network that allows the flow of data to take place, a data-centric environment that's backed up by zero trust principles, right? All this is doing in the end is creating, the environment to be able to move forward to some of those applications like you're talking about, right? So that stuff's non-negotiable. It has to happen, or we're not going to be able to do some more advanced analytics on what you're talking about. That is a big challenge for us. The good news is that there is a lot of great activity that's going on. If you can get that data, if you can ensure the data gets there, the right data, and you've got it normalized in a way that you can act on it in a common way, there are a lot of things that we can do with it, right? And so when you're talking about when we're looking at joint all-domain command and control, and we're looking at the challenges of decision-making, both at speed and with the enormous amount of data that's coming in, a lot of times we go back and we take a look at, well, what did our modeling and simulation produce, right? There's an opportunity now to be able to continuously integrate data that is actually happening, fuse that with what our model behavior has suggested, integrate with many more sensors than we have ever had possible, orchestrate them in a way across across modalities so that we have access to many more things that can influence that decision, and then work through the human cognitive piece of being able to present not data but information, as you say. And it is not going to possibly be this is the right answer, but as Dr. Iyer talked about risk scores earlier from a zero trust perspective, it's going to be a similar thing. I think the ability to understand, and maybe it's not a matter of understanding can you take a shot or not. Maybe it's a level of understanding about where you may have information gaps and be able to quickly deploy assets that you need to be able to close those gaps and make an informed decision. So, but I think that's a great way of characterizing, where it is that we're headed. Okay, well, I think that's all the time we have for questions, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of my fellow panelist members here on the Warriors Corner for Data-Centric Environment, I just want to thank you all for listening to us and for the great Q&A this afternoon, and thank you.